When macOS 27 will be publicly released in September of 2026, all Intel Macs will lose major software updates, truly marking an end to an era. Nevertheless, I still own and use the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro on a daily basis, which is the most powerful Intel MacBook ever released, and plan to continue doing so. It still does all of the basics well, edits 4K footage from my camera, and allows me to do some gaming in Windows. And, frankly, I do not see how an older version of macOS will prevent me from being able to do these things for the next few years at the very least. Though it is not even close to being perfect. And so today I'll show you all of the benefits and drawbacks this laptop has, so that you can decide whether it is still worth using, or maybe even buying for about $300 to $400. I own this MacBook for just over a year, having bought it in June 2025. Beforehand, I've primarily used Ultrabooks, including a base model M1 MacBook Air, 2nd generation ThinkPad T14s, and a 2015 13-inch MacBook Pro. Neither became my main computer though. Editing videos on a 13 or 14-inch display was plain uncomfortable, and gaming was tough across the board due to different reasons. Times change, people change. I'm not an exception. I wanted a computer that would be a great on-the-go workstation, yet could turn into a decent desktop when I wanted it to. Not wanting to spend much, I instantly landed on 2019 16-inch MacBook Pros. Starting from about $300 per decent unit, these laptops have ticked most of the boxes. For the money, I have gotten a fantastic 16-inch display, good enough specs, premium build quality, insane trackpad and speakers, and ability to run both macOS and Windows. The latter one is important to me, as I prefer macOS on the go due to seamless integration of trackpad gestures, but I do think that Windows is better suited for desktop usage. My exact laptop is the base model 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro, having a 6-core Core i7-9750H, Radeon 5300M graphics with 4GB of GDDR6 memory, 16GB of RAM, and 512GB SSD, both of which are soldered in place. Compared to even a base M1 MacBook Air, the CPU does fall behind noticeably, scoring only about 5800 to 6000 points in Geekbench 6 multi-core test, versus 8200 done by the M1. Its closest desktop CPU equivalent is something like Ryzen 5 2600. While not impressive by 2026 standards, it is still not slow. All of the daily apps remain fast and responsive, and the processor is still usable for more demanding work, provided that you have some patience. GPU is a much better story though. Radeon 5300M has the raw power comparable with the laptop GTX 1650, and is noticeably faster than the M1 graphics are. In my case, having a better GPU helps majorly in video export speeds and timeline snappiness with many effects applied. While definitely not as good as RTX 3070 in my main computer, I can still preview 4K Sony S-Log3 footage with color correction, denoiser and sharpener applied. Windows also gives this laptop access to a large variety of games. It will not run new AAA titles, though it is still fine for popular games like GTA 5 Enhanced, CS2, PUBG, and can run AAA games right up until 2022 or 2023. Storage and RAM. 16GB of RAM in the base config lets this laptop have the edge over 8GB Apple Silicon Macs, as, unlike those, it actually allows you to have many tabs open in a web browser, and it will not bottleneck this laptop when photo, video editing, and gaming are concerned. Storage is a big limitation for my use case. 512GB as the base amount still seems respectable today, especially compared to the base 256GB amount on many Apple Silicon Macs, though still, once you add Windows, multiple video projects, photos over the last couple months, and a game or two, it becomes very restrictive. And so if I would be buying this laptop again, I would have definitely gone for a version which has at least a terabyte of space. Spec'd out 16-inch MacBooks also exist, as they could be configured with up to 64GB of RAM, 8TB of storage, Core i9s, and GPUs up to Radeon 5600M with 8GB of HBM2 memory. Still, I would advise against buying them as they carry a major price premium, deteriorating the main advantage base models have: their price. If you consider buying one today, stick to i7s, base graphics, 16 or 32GB of RAM, and preferably a 1TB SSD, and make sure that you do not pay over $400, as at this point you enter the M1 MacBook Air price territory. Specifications only tell part of the story. How's this laptop actual to use now? And, most importantly, what it can still do well. Everyday tasks remain fast on this laptop. Apps open quickly, web browsing is smooth, multitasking barely causes problems. The keyboard and trackpad still feel excellent. Keys are tactile and well placed. Trackpad is insanely accurate and supports gestures. Large, sharp, and color accurate display is equally good for creating and consuming content, while the 6-speaker array is comparable to a mid-range JBL speakers in terms of clarity, though not volume. It is still suitable for photo and video editing, though the MacBook's age definitely becomes revealed here. When editing raw photos, you often have to wait a second or two to see the correction applied, and the same goes for switching between photos. When doing video editing in DaVinci Resolve, it struggles after color correction is done and all of the effects are applied. Playback will stop, though individual frames remain previewable. Timeline, at worst, becomes sluggish, but not completely unresponsive. This has been enough to complete my videos. Using 4K 25fps footage at 100 megabits per second, it is definitely more demanding than the typical phone video, but still lighter than many professional formats. This is still a good laptop to begin learning video editing on, and it is still a usable portable machine for an amateur, though the one which is not ideal to be used as a primary computer. Compared to the competition, used gaming or workstation laptops, and, importantly, M1 MacBook Airs, you get a decisively better build, feature-rich, premium feeling computer. Its display, speakers, build quality, and Windows support make it an appealing choice for entry-level media production, lighter games, or everyday use. Though every one of these roles comes with three major compromises: battery life, heat, and Apple's hardware peculiarities. Radeon 5300M is both a major benefit and a major pain of this laptop. By default, macOS uses integrated Intel UHD 630 graphics to render the interface, but macOS Tahoe is way too demanding for it. All of the animations lag and stutter. I fixed this by disabling automatic graphics switching, which forces the dedicated GPU to stay active at all times. Before doing so, I would grade the system performance score at 2 out of 10. Right now, it would sit at about 6.5 out of 10. This improvement came at the expense of the battery life, which was halved. Beforehand, I would manage to squeeze 5 to 6 hours of screen time on one charge. With the dedicated GPU permanently enabled, I normally get around 3. Heat is the next problem. The CPU and GPU combined can consume about 110 watts, before accounting for the rest of the laptop. During demanding work, the fans become extremely loud and the underside gets too hot to use comfortably on your lap. With that being said, my MacBook is actually a best case example. I replaced the thermal paste, added thermal pads between the power delivery components and back cover, and often use this laptop on a cooling stand. Replacing the thermal paste was maniacally difficult, and the thermal pads make the bottom of the laptop even hotter to touch, but performance has improved substantially. Its Geekbench score rose from under 4500 to around 5800 to maybe even 6000. Most of the examples on the used market have never been serviced though. Dried out thermal paste and dust, accumulated between pins on the cooling pipe, makes these laptops run even hotter and louder than they normally would, not to mention major throttling caused by constant overheating. When buying this laptop, you should be mentally and physically prepared to at least replace the thermal paste. which requires you to disassemble most of the laptop. You may have noticed that a few of the problems I have described, especially varying software support, can easily be bypassed by using a different operating system, like Windows. You'd be right to an extent, but it is not as simple as that, unfortunately. Integrated GPU is unavailable outside macOS for some reason, leaving the dedicated Radeon GPU always active. Battery life falls to around 2 hours, and the laptop runs even hotter and louder. Trackpad support is poor. Only 4 out of the 6 speakers work, Touch ID is unavailable, and the touch bar offers only basic controls. In other words, Windows is still useful to have for gaming and Windows-only software, but it is not a good operating system to daily drive on this MacBook. There is also a major long-term risk when buying this MacBook. Soldered-on SSDs tend to die without warning. This issue is not as widespread as some other known MacBook failures, like the butterfly keyboards becoming stuck or GPUs failing on most 2011 15-inch MacBooks. Yet, keep in mind that the only way to repair a dead SSD on these MacBooks requires microsoldering new memory and power components, and even that may not always be possible. Little note about gaming. In my experience, this MacBook can at most supply 70 watts to the CPU and the GPU simultaneously, and that's even with thermal pads applied and a cooling station. If the processor consumes too much, GPU clocks collapse after several minutes. In order to get stable FPS in games, I limit the CPU to roughly 20 watts and kept competitive games at 60 FPS and demanding titles to 30 or 45 respectively. Still, the GPU runs at only about 75% of its speed most of the time, and some games become CPU bound. In conclusion, this MacBook is still good for me and my use case. It is a good machine for everyday tasks, and is a decent video editing or gaming workstation when I need it to be that. It may not even have half the power of my desktop PC, but thanks to its versatility, it has taken the main computer spot nevertheless. If you still have this laptop, I highly suggest replacing the thermal paste, as it will restore most of its original performance. At $300 to $400, it can still make sense if you want a large display, dedicated graphics, along with Windows and macOS on one machine. Keep in mind though that a similarly spec'd Windows laptop or an M1 MacBook Air are safer purchase options.